Hello? Who's there? Hey. Dagger, still it! Still it!
Okay.
Guys, welcome back to the Art Life Podcast. This is a special one. This is the first episode in our new studio located right at Art Life Gallery. To kick things off, we've got my dear friend, Erick Innis, a 7-year special operations combat veteran with 5 tours between Iraq and Afghanistan. He's an inspiration to me and a patriot to America. He left the services and started Coastline K9, one of the leading protection dog training facilities in America. He has personally trained my dog, Dagger. And aside from that, a great guy, amazing human being. Thank you for being here, brother. Glad to have you.
No, I appreciate it. An honor to be on this podcast. Just getting through Miami traffic to get here, though.
You know, poor Eric. We didn't think about the traffic. He spent about 3 hours coming from Naples, his facilities out there. But he's here now. We're here, and I'm happy to have you. You know, let's just get right into it. To give a little background, I met Eric a couple years ago. We had bought Dagger, our guard dog that everyone knows, and you know, Eric did a great job of just tightening him up and getting him to the next level of protecting our family. And he's definitely worked with some of the biggest, you know, celebrities and, you know, high profile people that you can imagine. He's going to keep that confidential, but, you know, I definitely want to start by kind of talking about your service. And firstly, thank you for your service to this country.
Thank you.
You know, you grew up in a military family, right? So,
I did, yeah.
So it was kind of instilled in you. Did you always know you wanted to start in the armed forces?
Yeah, so the path to get there was a little bit different. And so, thanks for that question. It's kind of a good, I don't talk about it too much.
Yeah.
Most people doing interviews don't ask. So it's actually good. So yeah, just family dynamic. If you backtrack, kind of like how I got there. In the beginning, my mom was a super young teenage single mom. Go to get her education while she was in college. When she became old enough, then she met my dad.
Yep.
And then he was in the Air Force. So this was out in California.
Yep.
So I was a little kid, 2-3 years old, and all the time the jets, the planes, right? Top Gun was still fresh in everybody's mind. So I grew up, and my theme song in my head, or like one of the songs that I loved a lot was the opening song to Top Gun, which is guitar riff, you know, planes taking off of aircraft carriers. And so we actually lived in Miramar, so right in California where a lot of that was filmed.
Yeah.
That kind of sparked it. So being a little kid, always with fighter jets above you and stuff like that kind of sparked it. So from that time, I'm thinking, I want to be a fighter pilot.
Yeah.
Right? Like, of course, Top Gun's a favorite movie. I see jets all the time, so I'm kind of immersed in it.
Yep.
And then, so I'm like, I'm going to be a fighter pilot. I'm going to be a fighter pilot. Well, then I start going through school, growing up. And then I was in the latter part of middle school when 9/11 kicked off. And so now I'm trying to do my plan. I'm like, okay, I graduate in like just a few years. I'm going to be an adult. All right, how do I go about being a fighter? Okay, you got to go to college. You got to do this. But one thing that stopped me is when I was really young, I needed glasses. Now these are just like reading glasses, but back then I had like crooked eye, like needed glasses.
So that makes a difference in the acceptance policy.
Yes. So the acceptance policy pre 9/11 was like, you got to be God-given, perfect.
Yep.
2015, right? Garrison, no war. They have all these rules. And so I was like, oh, all right.
Knocks you off the list.
Yeah, it knocks me off the list. At that time, though, my dad was transitioning from the Air Force to the Army. So he was like doing an interchange program. And so he went from the Air Force, and he went from being in the Air Force to going through Special Forces selection. So he went from like Air Force to Special Forces Green Beret selection and pipeline, and that's when 9/11 kicked off. So
your dad was still active.
Yeah, so he was still
military.
active. I think he's about to retire like now.
Oh, he's still in there?
Yeah.
Wow.
So 9/11 happened, and then now I'm learning about Green Berets, Special Ops, Special Forces, like the Army. And now I'm like,
That looks pretty cool
paint
too.
my face. You know what I mean? And, you know, my dad's coming home with like equipment and rucksacks and, you know, sharing me little like kid stories, right?
Yeah.
Of how training's going. Cause you don't see him for a few months and he comes and he's, oh, I graduated this part, jumping,
Yeah.
right? Graduated this part, the tactics, stuff like that. So then that kind of shifted my navigation.
And you're in a really pivotal point of a young
Oh,
adult,
100%. This
young
is
man's life.
At this time, it's like
Your early teens.
early high school.
Yeah.
At this, so it's like you got 3 years to make a decision.
Yeah.
So, but I always knew I wanted to go in the military. So if you ever look at like the photos or like the holidays or like Halloween, stuff like that, I'm the kid with like the painted face
Yeah.
and the helmet, right? Some years it's like World War II. Some years it's like 3. Sometimes you're like, where did you get all that stuff from? The thrift store, right?
Yeah.
Once my dad ended up graduating, he became a Green Beret and going through that whole thing. War was, you know, it was like, this is happening, America, right? George W. Bush
America's
speeches.
really on a war footing.
Yeah. And so this is the first time kind of experience as a kid. And so I'm like, all right, if I'm going to go do soldier, I want to do it at the highest level so that my survival rate hopefully is
Yeah.
increased, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a spade's a spade. So initially, my dad going through it, he was like, you need to go be an officer, still go to college. So I tried and apply and go to West Point. So I went that whole route. Got my Eagle Scout, got my congressional nomination. And so I had a slot, a pre-acceptance to go to the summer. They do like a summer acceptance prior to like plebe year, like your first year. And so I got accepted to that, got a letter, right, to go to the United States Army Academy.
Yeah.
And at that time, something else happened. Black Hawk Down, the movie came out. And I had read the book. Like in high school, I'm like, okay, I want to know what, because the last real war thing was 1993,
Yeah.
Desert Storm, then Somalia. And so I became infatuated with that book. Like,
Special operations.
yes. So the movie came out. The book itself, I probably read, like I had to duct tape it to hold it together. That's how many times reading it as a high schooler.
It's a hell of a story.
Oh, it's awesome. And so I was like, oh, I want to go, screw college. I might miss the war,
Yeah.
right? Like if I'm going to go 4 years,
Yeah.
I might miss the war. And so instead, I told my parents, I was like, not going to West Point. And they're like, WTF? Like you just did all this
You're
work.
like, I want to see action.
And so went that route. And then that's when I signed in for the Army. And I was like, if I'm going to do it, I went straight into the Ranger program. So graduated high school 2 weeks later, boom, out to the Army. And then kind of the story unfolds and the selection process as a young man going through that at you know, a really hot time during the war. So
I was going to say it must be completely different deciding where to place yourself in the armed forces during peacetime
Yeah.
versus we're in an active conflict and you're not just going to end up on a military base somewhere doing
Right.
training. You're heading to a hot zone.
right. So in like garrison life, people are like, what's my benefits? What location? I want to go to Italy. I want to go here. I want to see the
This
world.
was different. Yeah.
This
you're going
is
to-
like,
you're going to Afghanistan.
yes, right? Like, you know, if you pass this, you are first up to bat at the time, right? Either go to Iraq or Afghanistan.
Yep.
And so in your head, that's like the goal. It's like
Yeah.
maybe it's ego, but it's like a primitive thing. It's like, put me in, coach.
Yeah.
Right? And you're young and you're kind of whatever, but you're like, I didn't come here to sit on the bench
Yeah.
type of. So I think at being young, filled with testosterone, you want that like next up manhood validation. And I think that's what it was, is like,
So when you were training, you're doing your special operation training, your ranger training, and the whole time you were looking forward to going to the conflict.
yes.
You wanted to go there.
Yeah, which is very interesting because you'll see people that is the opposite.
Yeah.
They're like, what's the least likelihood job that I can get to go do that because it's risky?
Yeah.
So I was the other way, right? So I was like, if I don't pass special ops selection, I am going to get thrown in with, for lack of better terms, like regular standardized
Yeah.
people. Not to knock them, but they have less funding.
Yep.
Their missions aren't maybe as critical to national defense, right? Instead of going after top tier terrorists, they're going after like the guy who digs the IED.
Yeah.
Right. He's got a shovel.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was like, if I'm gonna risk my life and go after that, then I want to go after cutting heads off of snakes.
Yeah.
I don't want to go after like, I don't know, just Bebop, Tom and Jerry, you know.
You wanted real terrorists. You wanted
yeah.
to be. I think there's
makes a
something to be
difference.
said for that, where you're taking action that you can see a direct result from. I think I would have been the same way. My grandfather was in World War II. He was the first general to lead an all-black platoon into D-Day. We're Armenian, and so he grew up in Queens, and the Armenians, as you may know, were completely persecuted.
Yeah.
His family was basically run out of Armenia. They resettled in New York, and so he was actually in law school and started hearing on the radio about Hitler. And he was like, wow, this was in, I think, like the mid 30s. And so he dropped out of law school about 4 years before World War II broke out and moved down to Georgia. And so by the time the war came to head with America, he was already very high up in the military. And he said he was down there and these rednecks didn't want to lead black soldiers. They were like, we won't do it. He said, these guys are stronger and smarter and better than, these redneck country boys. And so he took them, trained them, and led them into battle. But interestingly enough, when that was all happening, 9/11 happened, I was really dying to go to war. I wanted to join as well. And he sat me down and he said, son, I will disown you if you join this conflict. And I actually, believe it or not, I was willing to go against him. And I went to the recruitment office it wasn't the Army. I wanted to join the Marines. And I actually lost my pinky when I was a young kid.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't let me even apply. They were like, just even missing half a finger, they wouldn't let me even start the application process. So I was heartbroken at the time.
Yeah.
But that's why I have a tremendous respect for people that are in that. I guess, so now that we've gotten through your training, how old are you when you finish your training?
18.
So you're an 18-year-old kid.
Yes.
That's the one thing that people, I think, gloss over when you see it on the news, that these conflicts, Ukraine, Russia right now, these are being fought by children.
Yeah.
These are 18-year-old pimple-faced kids going into a hot zone and shooting each other.
Yeah. What's the? I saw a quote before. It was something like, war is old guys sending young guys to fight each other.
But it's not young guys, it's children.
Right.
It is like 18 years old is a child.
Right.
So you are an 18-year-old child, but now you've got all this training. You think you're Rambo.
Oh, for sure.
You think you're a
For sure.
badass.
Yeah.
I can't imagine a little 18-year-old Eric running around with fresh off of your military training.
Yeah.
Probably walking with a little bit more swagger.
Yeah.
What was the emotion like when you got the call up that you were, did you go to Afghanistan first or Iraq?
Iraq first. So Iraq was my first deployment, right? So 18 years old, bright-eyed, graduated from what they had at the time. It was called Ranger Indoctrination Program. And it was literally just haze and beat the piss out of you until enough people quit. And it was that for a month. Like, no, that was the objective. And so my initial class was, I think we took the initial like PT test where the bare minimum Army standard stuff, like push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, run for 5 miles. I think our class started with like 312 people. 4 weeks later, 63 of us graduated.
Wow.
So like attrition rate just crushed.
So that's like 20% of the class graduates or less? At 20?
I mean,
something like that.
It's
a
crazy.
low rate. It's a
super low
rate. It's
rate.
a high attrition rate.
And you got to think that's just in 4 weeks. So people people get kicked out for you look wrong. People 2 seconds too late, right? Like just they are literally nitpicking.
They're looking for reasons to kick you out.
They are finding a way, any way possible, for you to potentially be a liability.
Yeah.
right? And it might just be, okay, well, for 1 second you did something that wasn't
Didn't click with your
enough,
commanding officer.
and it was just enough for them to go, one's not like the other.
Yeah.
Right? You're out. Right? Type of deal. So it was extremely stressful. So that time was the selection program to get into our special operations unit.
Yeah.
You know, the Rangers. And then I would say that was we graduated February. I think October I was in Iraq.
Wow.
And so we went through the summer. We went through a 6-month training cycle, because when I got to my unit, they were already in Iraq. And so a few weeks later, they came back, and then we were 6 months back out the door. So I think a lot of people don't understand, when you get into special operations, like, they don't collect dust.
No,
right?
they use
Special
them.
operations get
They train them to use them.
used. Okay? It's not a Safe Queen like asset or a firearm that just collects dust.
Yep.
It gets used. You know, from the audience wise, people they hear about Green Berets, they hear about SEAL teams. Most people don't hear about the Rangers, but if you look at data, you know, our kind of unit is a very silent professional type of unit. And that is instilled on us. Like, we are not a Hollywood, no one knows you, good,
Yep.
right, type of deal. And but when the statistics came out after the war, the Ranger Regiment was the only unit in constant combat from the invasion into pullout.
Wow.
There wasn't a single day break that the Ranger Regiment was
Not in
not
operation.
deployed.
Wow.
Right, where that's not the case for other special operations units.
Finish training.
It's good.
You're 18 and a half, 19 years
Yeah.
old. You are now
Iraq.
find yourself in Iraq.
Yeah.
You step foot into Iraq. Walk me through what it was like that first day when you get off the plane. Well, this is interesting. I feel like a lot of people don't know this. How do you get to Iraq? There's no, you're not on
good.
JetBlue.
We go in a cargo plane, and we're going and we fly to Europe, hit a refuel, and then we are on the way. So literally it's just a pit stop. So you're probably, our mission set is to be anywhere in the world within 18 hours from the moment we get a text, a pager, stateside. It's
Anywhere in the
18
world.
hours, you're somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we go in a cargo plane with all of our stuff. And so once we go into Iraq, which is very interesting, and a lot of veterans know, once you get into a combat, wherever you're going, which is typically a main hub, you do this like death spiral landing.
That's what I wanted you to
Yeah,
talk
I
about.
figured so much.
Yep.
So you do this. So you're flying into the airspace at night, naturally not to get shot down. And you're flying high, and then once you get, it's not like this airplane, like you're landing in Miami, and you're like, wow, there's the water.
Cruise down.
This is like a death spiral. So at the last moment, you change your course, and you're doing this death spiral into the airport, and you're doing a super fast landing.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a, hey, like, Delta, enjoy your flight. Like,
We'll be
so it's pretty
descending over
gnarly.
the next 30 minutes. That's what I've heard from guys, that you're basically just doing a nosedive to Earth.
No one warned me for that. So like as an 18-year-old, I'm like we're avoiding missiles or something. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, no.
Did anyone get
Yeah.
sick on your
Oh, people
plane?
get sick all the time.
Yeah.
People get sick all the time. Yeah.
All right, so you do a death spiral. You land in hot in the middle of the desert, 3 a.m.
Yeah.
You go to your bunks, wake up. How long was it once you touched down in Iraq until you got your first mission?
Oh, sometimes it's that night. That's how fast, because there's already a team there. Once we come in, another one's leaving. That's how you have zero overlap.
Yeah.
So like the plane that we're coming in and landing, another team or another platoon is taking that plane out.
So there's no time to nurse a jet lag.
No. So
You just come in hot and go to war.
correct. So you get everything situated, right? Like obviously there's security stuff I can't explain, but
Yep.
you're making sure if terrorists somewhere in the top 10 on the target pops up, you guys are able to execute it that night. And so that gets interesting, right?
Yeah.
And so that first deployment was end of 2007, beginning of 2008 was like the low overlap. So that's when Iraq like erupted back again. They called it the resurgency, right?
Yep.
So the big in 2003, and then 3 years later, bam, it popped off again. And that was a lot of the Iranian influence.
Yeah.
Pushed a whole bunch of, that's when we started seeing the
proxies.
IEDs, rockets, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's when it like skyrocketed. And so that was an interesting time. The team that I got put on was a combat search and rescue team. So I was the newest guy. So as the newest guy, I'm not going out with like my actual team because I'm the new guy.
Yep.
They're all
Already
in
seasoned.
sync. They're all in season. Technically, I'm the liability,
Yeah,
right? The new
of
guy
course,
is.
yeah.
They've never gone. Some of these guys they're 20. They've already gone through 3 tours, right? So
Yeah.
I'm 18 with 0. Okay. So then I got put on a search and rescue, and our whole job was as a group of, there was a handful of Rangers, and our job was to literally follow around Delta Force when they did their mission. So in case they got shot down, we were immediately there, right? And that was our job, and we chased them. We're part of them, but essentially
So you were basically shadowing
we shadowed them
the combat guys.
all over the country.
Yeah.
And so that's cool because that opened up something that a lot of my teammates never saw, is because sometimes there were daytime hits. And for the first time as like 18, 19-year-old Erick, I'm like, okay, we're in Iraq bad, right? Iraq desert, camels, whole 9. But we did some daytime missions and you're flying over the country and you're like, this would be a really cool vacation spot.
Yeah.
Like some of the oases that you
Beautiful,
see
I've heard.
in the middle of nowhere, and you're like, you could put a resort like
Yeah.
in this. There's just random patch of palm trees, greener than green, in a little watering hole the size of like what you would see at a
You could
condo
totally see-
apartment complex.
I hope
somewhere.
I live to see an Amman, Iraq.
That it would be cool.
St.
right?
Regis, Baghdad.
Yeah. You're like, oh, the Marriott. And you know what I mean? Like, very interesting.
Well, you know what's interesting? So I visited Vietnam a couple years ago, and my grandfather was still alive, and I called him. I said, Dad, Grandpa, I'm going to Vietnam for a vacation. And he said,
Right,
you're
that's
going
gnarly.
where?
Yeah.
He's like, are you out of your freaking mind? You're going to get shot. You're going to get kidnapped.
Right.
I said, Grandpa, it's not like that anymore. It's super safe. It's a thriving economy. There's all this opportunity there. And I went. It was an incredible experience. They're just warm, loving people. I never felt, I feel more endangered walking around in Miami than I did there. And I thought about it, like, it is my sincere hope that we both live to see our kids one day call us like, Dad, guess what? I'm going to spring break in Iraq.
Yeah.
No,
and when I do with my business now, which I travel to Europe,
yeah.
it's almost the same thing. When you see these, like, you're going down a street and you see what that street looked like during World War II.
Yeah.
And you're like, there's a photo of like an
Half the
American
buildings are
tank,
blown up.
a building's gone, a sniper hide in that, like,
Yeah.
it's now a CVS.
Yeah.
Right. And you're like,
wild.
if I would have told someone, right, or just anyone of our World War II generation that's like, hey, I'm going here.
Yep.
That's
Blows their mind.
Oh,
Fortunately, life moves fast. Humans
Yeah.
are pretty good at forgetting and moving on.
yeah.
So back to Iraq, you are in your first deployment. And I know there's some stuff you probably can't talk about, but tell me about a mission that you can explain, or at least the emotional experience and, maybe one of your more memorable missions, either good or bad, just some of the experience that you took away that will sit with you for the rest of your life.
No, it's a good question. I'll never forget my first, like, on target where there's engagements, there's gunfights. Nobody's gonna forget that,
never
right?
forget
You'll never forget that. I finally get in with the team. I'd already been like a month and doing the search and rescue and following around the Delta guys. And so I get back to my team and we go do a mission. It's like, hey, get your ears wet, right? Wet behind your ears. Like, this is going to be your first one.
Yeah.
Hold this guy's pocket. Don't mess it up, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't be a liability. Actually, I don't want you to do nothing, right? Like,
Just hide in the
yeah,
back of
yeah,
the-
like
the
if there's
Humvee.
stuff happening, don't do stuff, right? just be around,
Yeah.
okay? And so I get it, right? We walk in, we we drive in, then walk in, and it's my first time being in a third world country. And you don't realize, like, it's funny now because I'm a dog trainer, but the amount of stray dogs
for sure.
that exist.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking this whole time in training, like, okay, be sneaky, right? People got
There's dogs
suppressors,
barking the moment you're out of the
night
car.
vision. Like, you start walking and there's like 25 feral dogs letting everybody know, hey, we see people. And you're like, these dogs are going to kill me,
Yeah.
right? They're going to get me killed. But once you get used to it, it's fine, but it's just gnarly. So my spidey senses are going on. I've got a million things. Like, I'm carrying a ladder. I'm carrying a litter. I'm carrying a rifle with a grenade launcher attached to it, which I can't even hold with 2 hands. So I have to use the ladder to hold it, right? Because there's not that many people.
Yeah.
So, like, everybody has to carry stuff. And you don't necessarily use everything that, like, you're carrying. It's just if you run into a problem, it's kind of like, don't leave without your credit card. Like, you might need it. You might need it type of deal. So we get there, we set up. I'm like, wow, okay, this is what it looks like from training in real life. Except this is a real freaking target. There's real bad guys.
Yep.
And we're walking to a city, and now I'm thinking back to the book of
Black Hawk Down.
Black Hawk Down. And I'm looking around, I'm like, you know, I'm 18. This is my first one, so I'm like overly paranoid, right? Because you're in training, you're like, everything is a gunfight.
Of course.
And so now I'm like, what about that window? That door? That window? Did the curtain move? Right? Where are those people going? Right? Like all these things.
You turn into a Secret Service agent.
So much. Right? You almost want to be like this the whole time. Like, did you see that? Did you see that? And most of the guys have been through it. They're like, they're so desensitized
They're all
to
calm. Did you find, not to interrupt it, did you find that other guys with more experience being calm and kind of going about it like another day at the office calmed you down?
Yes, to a degree. But most guys are aggressive. Like, everybody wants to have the ball in the game, right? Nobody wants to be the guy just running routes and never gets a ball thrown at him, but, you know, that's his job, is to, you know, be the decoy or whatever, cog in the wheel. So most guys are super aggressive, but in order to be in that organization, like, you have to be alpha, like testosterone aggressive, like
everyone wants the headshot.
Everybody wants that, right? So we roll into this target and we get situated. Well, something kind of happened that I can't really explain, but one guy there was a guy not where he needed to be. One of my peers, who is also 18, like, this might be one of his, maybe his fourth mission, some first deployment. He sees the, like, little wrinkle. And so he gets and fills that gap. And just as he fills that gap, 2 dudes run out with AKs. They come running out of the building with AKs underneath lamplight, because now we're looking into a courtyard. It'd be like running into your front porch, like with a light on, and they're coming out to fight. And both of these guys, to include the brand new guy, boom, dome that guy. They kill these 2 guys on the spot. These guys rounded the corner.
They were down.
Lights out.
Yeah.
When you see the execution level of an 18-year-old
just crushing
at a high level, you're like, yeah, like
I can do that too.
For sure.
You're like, I can do that too.
But you're also like, you lucky, because your first deployment, you already got one, like, notch on the buckle and the buttstock. Like,
you were jealous. You're like, I wanted that shot.
For sure. Right? And then what ends up happening becomes like a golden child later, because it just happens like that, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be like the guy who never caught a pass, but the catch that he won the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, now his jersey sells. So anyways, we end up going into the building, and kind of that's where my real memory, right? It's kind of the first time you see a dead person. You're like, it's real life.
Yeah.
You're like, that person is not alive.
That guy was running 5 minutes ago.
He's unalived now.
Yeah.
And so we go and hit the house, whole nine, inside, do all of our tactics. Everything's clear. And so coming back outside, it's not that it negatively affected me. It just brought everything to senses, right? It's like the bath salt. You're like, bam. Yeah. You're like, and so what was interesting though is that there was a guy that was alive on the target, and one of the guys that was killed was his brother. And so naturally, one of the craziest things I seen was not our interrogators, because they're kind of limited to what they can do, but Iraqi interrogators, that's their country.
Yep.
And they were like, do you want to be like your brother? Right? And there was a whole bunch of other stuff
Yep.
that happened.
Yep.
And they're like, if you don't want to be like your brother, then let us know. Right? And so there was some stuff
information
I saw, and like, and that just opened my brain to war at this level. Right? This is, hey, does your guy know a shovel too? Point us to the house. No. This is like, where is the guy that finances the entire operations? Where's the money guy?
Yeah.
Right? And so you start seeing that type of stuff. And one of the interrogators, awesome guy. He was an former Iraqi Special Forces guy. And so he rolled with us because we were attached a Ranger team and a Navy SEAL team. Super cool. Their task force, I think it's fine now, but they nicknamed themselves as Chuck Norris. So,
that's the wrong crew to run into.
so they all wore Chuck Norris patches, right?
That's awesome.
And like Chuck Norris headband on dirt bike, like, you know.
So how
like
many
that.
guys are in the Chuck Norris crew?
Oh, it's just a Navy SEAL team. And
So like how many Navy SEAL,
Okay.
how many Rangers?
so I would say
Guess, if you had to guess.
I would say probably like 40 in total, right? Well, you have a lot of extra guys,
Yeah.
right? But 40 all together. And so that was cool. But this guy, he's got a book out, and I'll just kind of show him because he's a super interesting character. His nickname, or his like code name in the book that he goes by, is Johnny Walker.
Oh, wow.
I got a book for him, signed, everything like that.
Yeah.
He's now a U.S. citizen. So he earned his
The
citizenship.
interrogator.
He
That's
earned
awesome.
his citizenship
Good for him.
because he did like the most work with special ops, and he led to so much success, and so he earned his citizenship. And so now he's an American citizen now.
Good for him.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Guys,
So that's
check
super
out
impactful.
Johnny Walker's book.
Super impactful.
Iraqi interrogator, now a U.S. citizen. I
Yep.
love those stories.
Yep.
And by the way, they should get U.S. citizenship.
Oh,
the
I
guy's
agree,
running around willing to
100%.
get his ass blown up with our boys.
That's the crazy thing. People think just because you work with us, you're like,
Made in the shade. No.
no. So here's the crazy part, and this is what this humanized this aspect, and so this is why I'm impressed from a human point of view, from a man point of view, from a citizen point of view, because he was a citizen of his own country, happened to have a war in it, right? Americans come, he was already a high level special operator, right, in his own country. The Americans come, who was it? So the terrorist in Iraq, there's multiple factions. They started hunting him just because he was in the military.
Of course. So it was a great risk to him. I mean, those guys.
So during the day, he was in hiding, moving his family during the day. Like that,
Just trying to survive.
without a U-Haul, like he's just moving, just avoiding getting found.
And at night, he's running missions.
At
with you
night,
guys.
he would come to the base.
Wow.
He would jock up. He'd look like a Navy SEAL. I'm talking
Full gear.
dual tube, MP5 suppressed.
Yep.
He would go do missions. Before the sun came up, he had to go figure out where his family moved to,
God.
and then start all over.
And so the U.S. would just
Nuts.
provide no support or assistance for that.
That's what's interesting, because
He's probably one of the most valuable members of your unit.
yeah, but he's
Giving that advice and
he's still just a citizen
He's a
of the
citizen,
country,
yeah.
right? Like, so that's what's interesting. But through that, you like, well, what would a man or husband do, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then you kind of think about, you're like, well, do I know anybody that would do that, right?
Yeah.
Like for their family, people say it,
It's a big difference between putting your ass on the
Yeah.
line when you're and
Right.
actually doing it.
So that really kind of like shaped the Iraq experience. So I did Iraq the first one, and then
Afghanistan after.
all Afghanistan afterwards.
What would you say the biggest differences you could put your finger on between being in Iraq and being in Afghanistan?
Oof. They're two totally different wars.
Yep.
And that's something that's interesting, because you think like, just because of timeline, we clump.
Americans clump it
we
all
clump
together,
Iraq and Afghanistan.
But I've heard the same thing, that they're completely
two
different.
completely.
Yeah.
And I'm not even talking like terrain.
Ideological.
It's like why there's a war
combatants.
is two totally different. Right? So Iraq, you got you got one side is trying to commit genocide to the other one, right? And so you're trying to prevent that. But money flow and inflow is coming from other countries to support that. And so you are trying to quasi set up like a democracy and prevent genocide. But a lot of it is urban, right?
Urban warfare,
it's a lot. It's urban warfare. So imagine, I don't know, going downtown Brickell and like minus the first world skyrises, but
it's urban warfare.
It's urban.
And Taliban and Afghanistan's more.
Yeah. So for the first time though, in both conflicts, after the initial invasion in Iraq, everything went to, they just started doing like their own guerrilla tactics. In the beginning of the invasion in Iraq was like, oh, Saddam Hussein's like army in the government, and they've got helmets and they've got uniforms. Fast forward like 3 years, and it's like the guy who owns the bakery decided to come out with an RPG.
Yep.
Right. And it's like your mental process of going, nothing happening, threat.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that like necessarily paints a picture. There's no jersey, right? Like there's no jerseys. You don't know
the bad guy until he pulls out a gun.
You don't. And so imagine that too. Like that's a responsibility of a lot of 18-year-olds, right?
Being able to decipher a threat from a civilian.
So Afghanistan is way different. There is urban aspects, but the country itself, what you learn and you kind of mature to and realize is, yes, we're talking, okay, 9/11, we're talking bin Laden, we're talking Al-Qaeda. Well, then we're talking Al-Qaeda, and then we're talking about Taliban. And a lot of times, like, they don't have anything to do with each other. Like Taliban, Al-Qaeda, like doesn't, yes, to us, to an American, to a NATO force, like
they both hate us.
Yeah. But how I kind of look at it, and sometimes, you know, I'm not a politicist, but how I wrapped my head around it was like, yes, the Taliban, it doesn't fit within our realm of first world America, but that's how they've been running the country for eons. Okay. Yeah. Afghanistan is called the graveyard of kings. So like nobody's been able to conquer it. Like we've gone through and you're like, oh, you see that fortress? That fortress was built by the people of Alexander the Great, and it's still standing.
They've got an amazing history.
Yeah. So like the history is so, that's why it's called the graveyard of kings.
Yeah.
There's a lot of resources, but the reason why it hasn't been conquered is because I think what sometimes people don't realize is like a lot of times Afghanis, or what we would run into is Afghanis in Afghanistan, they don't qualify or quantify themselves as Afghani. Like they don't have like, oh, we are under one flag. Like you're like, oh, I'm a Floridian. In Afghanistan, we're like, oh, we're in Afghanistan. And they're like, well, what's that? Right? Yeah. They know their section and their like county.
Yep.
Right? And they're like, I'm pro my county. Right? And so they got a mayor,
so
they got a governor.
Localized. Wow.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
It's hyper localized. Yeah. So imagine like pre-colonial America.
Yep.
Right? You got maybe Indian tribes everywhere.
Yep.
And then you're trying to say you guys are all the same. And they're like, we got different language. We've got different customs, cultures, colors, flags. Okay. So now when you put that's kind of how Afghanistan is. So that's why you'll go to one area in the conflict, totally different language. Go to another one, completely different language. They don't know they exist.
See, I don't know about you guys, but I had no idea about that.
It's a different
dynamic.
For sure.
Wow.
And what I kind of rationalize or wrap my head around going into it is just you're dealing with hyper localized. It's a giant country. Most people don't like. It's a big country.
Yeah.
You got everything from like basically Himalayan mountains all the way to like flat salt bed and everything in between inside terrain. Then you have like Al-Qaeda. You got international terrorism, which is like Al-Qaeda, which is why we went there. And then you have like Localized, which is run by Taliban. And so how I kind of rationalized it in my head at a 20-year-old at the time, I'm like, okay, Taliban, bad, because they try to kill us the same, but they're kind of like the mob.
Yeah.
Like they're like,
It's like the cartel of Afghanistan.
yeah, it's basically like, don't mess up with how we make money. Don't occupy our area. And if you go outside of our perimeter, it's whatever. But if you come in our backyard, we have to, because you're messing up our operations.
Well, Afghanistan's essentially a narco state at this point. I think, I don't
giant.
know the number, but a large percentage of their GDP
Yes.
comes from heroin and opium production.
I think some of the stats was like 80%.
Yeah.
80% of the world's heroin.
Comes from Afghanistan.
Yeah,
it's a narco state.
It starts a black
and
tar.
the Taliban is basically the cartel.
That's it.
That's controlling it.
Yes.
Which is pretty wild.
So that's different, because then it's like, well, the narco state funds the terrorism, right? So it's like, okay, well, the chicken or the egg? Like, do you wait until there's terrorism, or do you try to figure out where it's getting funded from?
Under your at least experience, did America do anything to combat the opium production, or they kind of turned a blind eye and just let it go?
No, they did. So we that was a thing. So like we would incriminalize them if they had like black tar heroin, because we know that the only way terrorism is funded there is through essentially heroin.
For sure.
Right? But it's like impossible. Like,
yeah,
when you walk through fields and you go to targets, it would be the equivalent of walking through a weed field, but you're walking through poppy fields that are acreage. And you're like, oh, these are being prepped for heroin. And you have to walk through them like they're dandelions. Right? And you're like,
you're just on a mission walking through heroin fields.
Yeah. So it's like, so they're very cyclical. So like actually all of the action that would happen after harvesting in the spring and before the winter.
They've got time.
So the winter, it's like dead. There's like no missions. You get people that are just, they're traveling to or from, they pop up, targets of opportunity, not that much fighting unless they were literally like, get off my lawn. Like, but where all the money and the ammo and like all that stuff came from was like after the harvest.
Wow.
So think of springs and fall. And so, if you're deployed during spring or fall, that's when new money came into the picture.
You're going to see
You know what that means?
You're
Bam.
going to see action.
Yeah.
So to me, it's really fascinating that the war was being fought seasonally. And that's one of those things that doesn't really get parsed through mainstream media. So me as just a regular citizen, I had no idea that we all know heroin comes out of Afghanistan. Yeah. Afghanistan's a major poppy producer. Yeah. But you don't really dissect it to the level where, wow, they're literally growing poppy, harvesting, turning it to heroin, selling it, and then buying weapons and shooting at soldiers.
Correct.
You guys would literally know, oh my God, if I get a September, October, deployment.
You're chomping at the bit.
It's going to be more action.
Yeah, you're licking your lips. You're like, we're on rotation for the winter. You're like, it's going to be slow. Not only is it cold, right?
It's slow.
It's slow. And so you want to get a tan. You want to lift.
Yeah.
And you want to go do targets and you want to take out bad guys. And that happens when there's funding.
Yeah.
Like when they have funding.
In the fall.
Yeah.
In the spring.
The other thing people don't consider is that when it's winter, the one thing I would say that the guys liked about winter is that stepping on IEDs and booby traps was low because the ground is frozen.
Oh, yeah. So they can't hide it.
So that's why also there's a pucker factor. Once springtime comes, the dirt is soft. Yep. It rains. They can hide IEDs. They hide IEDs. It's fresh. That's when you know. So that's why it's like, okay, well, if it's gonna be that threat level, it better be worth it, right? Yeah. Like we hopefully get into some stuff because nobody wants to go around, not get what they were trained for, and literally have a super high risk of booby traps.
You
want
to kill terrorists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't want to just play defense, right? And worry about where is the next step going to kill me.
Did you ever see an IED go off?
No. So that kind of ties into my time as a dog handler, which I was that was the number one threat at the time.
Yep. IEDs.
IEDs.
I was going to ask you, did you ever handle dogs while you were in active military, or did that come later?
No, yeah. So that was like the genesis part of it. So my first 3 tours, Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, I was a shooter.
Yep.
Right? shooter. One of the deployments, my role was basically the guy with the rocket, which was super cool.
Wow.
Right. And so shooting rockets at people it's a ego move, right? Right.
Shooting rockets at people.
Yeah, that's an ego move. You know, like
Sounds like the name of a punk rock band.
in America, it's like, do you got a train horn on your lifted truck?
Yeah.
Okay, this is like you shoot at me with a rifle, like I'm shooting a rocket back at you.
Yeah.
So that's like the equivalent of like, you know, honking a big horn or something like that.
Yeah.
So that was cool. But actually, what kind of segue into how the genesis of the dogs happened was that happened my last 2 tours to Afghanistan. My second tour, which was the first one to Afghanistan, it was a big jump from Iraq to Afghanistan. Most of the guys that had in my platoon, they've only been to Iraq like 8, 9, 10 times in a row. Afghanistan at that time in 2009 was like forgotten about because, right? Like we ran bin Laden out and we did the bombing campaign and the invasion.
They claimed a victory lap.
Yes, like in 2001, right? Like shortly after. From 2001 until like 2007, it was all Iraq show. And then something happened where a resurgency, they really tried to kick us out of Afghanistan. And so they like upped the stakes. And so what ended up happening is we started seeing influence from other countries try to take advantage
In that situation.
in the situation. And so it put Afghanistan back on the map. We were there. We didn't leave. It's just we kind of like did what we got to do. Right? Bin Laden was gone.
And it cooled off.
Yeah, it cooled off. So the guy's experience was not, remember, it was different, right? Like it's two different games. So we jumped from Iraq to Afghanistan and we had a hard lesson, actually. It was summer. And like we said, like summer, it's showtime. And so we hadn't experienced a fighting season yet. This is just what they call it. It's a fighting season, basically from end of spring to beginning of fall. It's called fighting season. And so we got there in the summer and we went to this uncharted territory in southern Afghanistan, which later I'll kind of plug something that we're working on to feature that time. And so me, my best friend, our platoon, hold on, we do this. We're in the fighting season, right? This is the show. It's what everybody wanted to be in, right? Everybody wants to be there. And so we go to a place that doesn't have a NATO presence since the invasion of 2001. So that means that terrorists are just, they're doing their thing.
Yeah.
It's like
There's
going,
no oversight.
It's like going to like maybe a certain part of the world, or I've been told there's parts of like Puerto Rico.
Colombia.
There's no police.
Yeah.
They run them out.
Yep.
Okay. So imagine that in Afghanistan, like they have not seen a uniform NATO presence 7 years.
Yeah.
They're doing what they want.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we go there. And at the same time, this is a big, there's documentaries all about this time period, all over Nat Geo, History Channel. They called it the Summer of Decision. So the U.S. military was basically like, hey, we either have to take this over or we're out. Like, we've been here long enough. Well, it's funny because that didn't happen until way later.
Yeah.
But in 2009, it was called the Summer of Decision. And what they did was they did a mass invasion of concentrated ground forces, specifically the Marines. And they basically said, start from the left side of the country
And sweep right.
and sweep across like old school, right? Like everybody in a line. Okay, march, right?
This is our city now. Yeah.
Type of deal.
Yeah.
Well, there's like I said, there's documentaries on it, but it kicked off the biggest like resurgency bubble that nobody really expected. And that's what made Afghanistan back to a focus like, hey, there's a conflict here again, guys.
Yep.
So during that summer of decision, the Marines are going and they get stuck. Like they get heavy. I mean, some of these, they're landing and there's a 50 pack of like Taliban meeting in the Tea Party and they just dropped in on. And they're like, oh, snap. Let's dance.
Yep.
Type of deal. And so there's a lot of casualties. Well, we ended up getting called, and this is probably the biggest mission of my life. I'm maybe 20. I'm 20 at this time, I
You've
think.
got real experience.
Yeah. So 20 at the time, second deployment. I just graduated from Ranger School, got my own Royal Ranger tab. It's a whole separate, school. And so I get there, I'm like super ego, like, man, I got my special unit. I got my Ranger tab, like from a uniform point, like I'm stacking
You're a
them
stud.
up.
Yeah.
And most of the guys I check back with at home are like, they're still smoking weed and like hanging out with.
I was concerned with sneaking into nightclubs when I was 20 years old.
Exactly, right? And so that's just that's kind of ego. That's why I base myself on like, what's someone else my age doing right now?
Yeah.
So we go through this deployment and then we hit this one mission, and I'll never forget. And there's a lot of stuff that goes with this, but we got kind of, and I'll say in a lot of, there's egos out there, but we got unmatched this day in this mission. And so we ended up taking multiple casualties. What it basically was we went to a town, and like in the book, right, that reading Black Hawk Down, it was, I can't say a day like that because that's their own honor, right?
Yeah,
but
similar.
Imagine 30-something dudes fighting a whole village.
Yeah.
A village. Straight hornet's nest village. 40 dudes. We have no aircraft, no satellites, none of like the cool stuff that makes you special. And it
got brought back to a more level playing field.
Level playing, because we're on their turf.
Yeah.
Right? We are the visiting team. They're
they
the
know
home.
Every nook
They're
and
the
cranny.
And so that's what gets interesting. You brought back Vietnam of like, in certain areas, that's how they run. Like there's tunnels.
Yeah.
There's thatched roofs, like they pop out of the ground like a gopher, whack-a-mole. Like that exists.
Yeah.
But that's why they've never been conquered. Like that stuff is
it's impossible
centuries,
to fight that.
and you can't fight that. So 6-hour firefight. We took 3 casualties. It claimed the life of my best friend. And so that kind of like, that was another mark that's like, this is real.
Yeah.
Right. And some policies and stuff. It's super cool without going into this episode. But my best friend was a heart donor. He ended up dying from his wounds. He was shot close to me.
And he donated his heart.
Yep. His name was Ben Kopp.
Ben Kopp?
Yep. Ben Kopp.
Well,
and
everyone thank Ben Kopp for his service, and we can never repay him for his donation to this country, but I certainly appreciate it. And he gave the ultimate sacrifice for this country and keeping us safe, and you can't ever repay that debt.
Yeah, that book about him it's called Heart of a Ranger. So it's super near and dear to me, but best friend going through everything. All this I'm telling you leading up to Iraq, to selection,
and
18.
he was by your side the whole time.
We were roommates, whole 9.
And so you lost him in a mission right next to you.
And so he was shot probably 5 yards from me. He ended up dying from his wounds. We got a close ambush. So that's, you want to talk about like Vietnam type of feel. We were walking back through this field, and there was a terrorist hiding in a haystack, like a stack of hay.
Yeah.
We didn't know it. We actually walked past it on a rescue mission to rescue some of our guys, and we had to come back. And so we passed this haystack, and like, it's a rule. It's kind of like the unsaid rule. Don't go back the route you came from. Like when you're talking about security and moving, you want to use different exits. Well, we had no choice in this situation. So we're fighting a whole village. There's one way back.
And they were waiting for you.
And so they waited for us to come back, and you can hear it. It's clear as day, but fully automatic AK opened up from like 20 yards to my left.
Oh.
Right. And so I jumped into a ditch. I had a machine gun at the time. Once I jumped in the ditch, out of immediate ambush, I popped back up, and then we started shooting. We ended up killing the guy, right? But Ben, he had gotten shot multiple times, I think like 3 times in a leg. He ended up dying, not even from the wound itself, but from negligence, medical negligence later on, right? And that kind of ties into his miracle story. But so that whole was a 6-hour firefight. Sun up to like probably like 2 p.m. in a July Middle Eastern day. Like it's hot. It's even people from Miami don't understand different type of heat.
103 degrees, dry heat.
It's different.
Yeah.
It hits different, right? And plus you got everything on. You're fighting. And so imagine fighting for 6 hours.
Yeah.
And I kind of think about this, and I'm not a NFL athlete or something like that, but like imagine not going to the bench
Ever
for
in
6
the entire
hours.
Game, yeah. People don't really understand what a kit, like, walk
Yeah.
us through quickly what your kit on an average day or even during this
yeah.
mission. You know, you've got what, 6 30-round magazines, you've got a
Yeah.
bulletproof vest, you've got comms. Like, quickly walk us through what your kit would be on a mission like that.
So I'll just give you some framework. Like
Yeah.
the audience probably knows, like I'm not the tallest guy. Like
Yeah.
you could see sitting in this chair. However, putting on kit, like, and what I mean by kit is like body armor, your gun, your ammo, your night vision, your helmet, all of that.
So heavy stuff. Let me tell you, as someone that trains with guns, it's not light.
Yeah. So being a machine gunner, you got almost a 20-pound machine gun, which doesn't seem a lot of people because people are at the gym curling a 20.
But carry it for 5 hours.
But carry after walking 5 kilometers just to get there.
Yeah.
And then fight with it and
Plus
not
the
let
ammo.
it down. And then as a machine gunner, I had to carry all my own ammo.
Yep.
So I had like 600 rounds of my own
Oh my
ammo.
God.
Right. And then
What caliber is that?
it's a 5.56. So it's a saw, basically.
A saw.
A souped up saw.
I love those guns.
And so all of that, and then do that, right? And that type, and where it matters of like your life, their life, like it.
You got to react.
It's not for points.
No, no.
It's not for like signing autographs. Like it's
for your life.
yeah.
And your friend's
yeah.
life.
And one moment,
cruise life, yeah.
changes the course of anybody's the rest of their life.
Yeah.
So going on and that kind of really that cemented. Okay, been in a close ambush, survived a close ambush. Like this is fighting, this is combat. Is 20 years old, right? And so after that, next deployment, basically attached alongside a Delta Force unit. So that was cool. You're seeing different Delta Force missions, being a part of them, and now I'm 22, 21, right? Like, so it's like, what other 21, 22-year-olds like running around? You got like a Delta Force guy running next to you with quad nods, like doing all this stuff. And it's while the rest of 20, 21-year-olds are playing Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Right?
You were
Like
playing Call of Duty in real life.
It's different. So it's kind of cool.
So I think you're kind of getting at you were looking for your next challenge.
Yeah. So the next challenge was also like getting out of that environment because I also knew, all right, well, I'm 2 or 3 different tours in, right? You kind of have a timeline of your contract. So I'm like, all right, I got probably 2, maybe 3 left before I have to get out.
Yeah.
Or stay in. Like, you got to figure out. And so I was like, well, there's no like job, right, for an assaulter outside in the civilian world. So then I started looking at stuff and hearing guys, okay, they go contract, they go do security. Yeah, they go do security and stuff like that. And I was like, all right, in order for me to do that, like, let me go and try, okay, who makes the most money like doing professional security detail around the world? And they're like, okay, well, snipers or designated marksmen. So I'm like, all right, cool, let me try for that, which is super goofy if you imagine, like, I'm 5'5" and like most sniper guns are taller than me.
Yeah.
So it'd be super goofy. So I went to try out for that. They only had 1 spot and a more senior guy took it. That was a blessing in disguise because as I would like one of my whole deployments, I was out with the snipers. I'm starting to learn like scopes, how to do stuff. They're like taking me under our wing for a few months. Like, oh, we're going to the range. Come do this. Kind of learn if this is something that you're interested in. I was like, yeah, I'm interested. The reason why, because I was like, dude, snipers are shooting the most people.
Yeah.
Now, how we utilize them wasn't like a ghillie suit creeping around. It was the fact of how we used them. Either they could see the farthest or they were in places.
They had oversight.
They had oversight to where they're seeing stuff before you. And so they
were getting shots.
Yeah, they take the advantage.
Yeah.
So I was just like, oh, well, let me get the ball, right? Like, if that's what it takes and the gun's got to be bigger than me, let me. So anyways, a more senior guy ended up taking it. And at that point, once that position was filled, I was like, well, the team already knows I'm kind of looking for like
the next
something
move.
special. Yeah. And so that's when the like platoon sergeant leader person of the Canine section of the special ops, he was like, hey, you want a job? Right? And I'm over here like, yes, like, what is it? And they're like, all right, well, try out for the dogs, right? And you still have to do all these little niche stuff. It's not like a good old boy, like, oh, that's what you want to do. Cool. No, it's like even within those, you've got to earn it. You got to try out. There's tiny little selections for them because they may just go, it's not a good fit.
Yeah.
Right. You can't just be like, yeah, I like dogs. I got a lab. Like, it's not like that.
Did you know the moment that you started it that you had a special connection? Because I've seen you around dogs, and you're like the Caesar Milan of canine protection dogs. You have a certain way with them and an energy, and to me, it feels like you were born for this.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It was kind of like a blessing in disguise. And believe it or not, before this opportunity came up, I like basically never owned a dog. Like I was like cat. I had a cat.
You were a cat guy.
Yeah, I had a cat.
You were a cat guy going into the military.
Yeah, you got to think like Mr. Bigglesworth, right? Like $1 million. Like that's the boss move, right? So no, the dog came up. I had seen, that was the first time I really saw a canine and special operations used type of deal. And I was like, well, they're also up front. They're doing cool stuff. Like they're in the mix.
Yeah.
So then I started paying attention to like, where do they, it's kind of like a team, like, well, what position? Where do they play? Where are they at on the field?
Yeah.
That like, you know, you buy a car and then you're like, wow, you start noticing that car drive by.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Once they're like, oh, you want to try out for
dog
dogs?
and the
I was like, woof. It opened my, because before that I was like, it's not my job, not my responsibility. Blinders.
You have your blinders.
I got to be good at this.
Yeah.
Not like, oh, what's Johnny doing?
What's
over
that
there?
guy with the big Dutch Shepherd doing?
No. I was just like, that's his job. I don't know how he got it. I have to do my bit. So anyways, came back, tried out, and it seemed to be like match made in heaven. So at that point, once we get back stateside, go to Special Forces Dog School. So you're with the SEALs, you're with us, Green Berets, and you're going through the whole thing, and you're like, dude, this is like the puzzle piece.
Yeah.
And so I felt right at home. I was able to participate, like even as a brand new dog guy, with a canine, and I had like a Malinois Shepherd mix, which was super cool. His name was Rex, and so I went to the Special Forces Dog School, graduated that, did like the advanced in-home, where that's where you're doing room clearing, night vision, light. You're doing night shoots, you're doing lasers, you're doing fast roping out of helicopters with a dog attached to you. So it's like that's a whole different dynamic. You got to be good at shooting, moving, clearing everything yourself, and then now attach an animal that has its own brain to your hip. And so you have to account for that, because like if the dog wants to go left but you're about to take a shot, you also have to know how to maneuver your body so that it doesn't throw your shot off. And so it's
wild.
If you know, when you're growing up, it's kind of like, how do you race when like your leg is attached to someone else and you're doing like
a potato race.
That where you're like tie the middle legs together and be in
synchronicity.
Imagine, so it's your 2 legs plus 4 legs, right?
Yep.
4 legs with teeth. Went to that, graduated from that, and then I was able to go to the Canine Olympics. So the Canine Olympics is something that's held from everything from Secret Service to special ops dogs to down to like local police departments, and it's held in the country. It's typically done like once a year. Mm-hmm. And I did pretty decent for my first time, like top 10.
Wow.
And I was like,
this is something.
All right, it's something.
This is something, yeah.
That gave me a lot of bravado. And so kind of when utilizing the dogs, my last 2 deployments were to Afghanistan. My first one, fighting season. And I was like,
with the dog. So now you have your dog. Now, do you go over with just one dog, or you go with all of the dogs that are already there? Walk us through, so now you're a canine trainer in the Rangers. Was it the Rangers still?
Yep.
So you're a canine trainer in the Rangers. Are you flying from the States with the dog you trained with?
Yep.
Are you getting there and there's already dogs? Walk us through how that works.
Yeah, so we bring our own. It's the one we've been training with. So you have this synchronization, right? They're homegrown. You've been training with them. The guys know the dog for the most part, right? That everybody knows. And so they're just another member of the team. They're not even like, they're kind of a pseudo mascot, but they're like, if you named them, it's like, oh, that's Bobby, right? Like that's another guy.
Yeah.
Right. And so as a handler, because we had trainers, we had like civilian trainers that would come over. And so at this time, I'm just responsible for making my dog team, and then another one, make sure they're good. So we would just bring our own. So we're not getting ones that are there. We're bringing specialized ones that have top 1%, right?
Yep.
So we get to Afghanistan, everything's the same. You get set up, whole nine, get your dog situated, where you're going to be, kennel, whole nine. It's just like you're making yourself at home, but it's game time. So the difference, though, being a dog guy in fighting season is there's no one in front of you. So you're up front. So when you're talking, the ground is fresh, IEDs, booby traps. You are the man. Like the other 30 guys, they are relying on you to be on top of your stuff. Because if you're wrong or the dog's wrong, somebody dies.
Now, what I was going to ask, was that one of your primary mission scopes was to sniff out IEDs with the dog?
Yeah, so that's a primary, of course. And then the other one is if people are hiding or people run away, right?
They track them down.
Yeah, you track them down. So our dogs are multi-purpose. They can find explosives. They can track for people. And then they could also be sent after and acquire a person that's, they're bad, but they're trying to run away. Okay.
You want to subdue them non-fatally.
Yeah. Well, you want to subdue them because you still got to ask them questions.
Yep.
Because that might lead to the bigger boss.
Yep.
If you kill everyone,
you don't get any answers.
you don't get no answers.
Yep.
Right. What's the dead men tell no tells? Right. So it's right. Like,
yep.
And so if you kill the only witness, right? Like there's no information. And so a lot of our stuff was, if we can, capture them first.
Yep.
Right? If they want to fight, they sealed their fate. But with the dog, so that fighting season, it's very, like at that dog, like I trusted whatever that dog told me. And the reason why is because like we're in southern Afghanistan. That is IED country. Like where people are getting blown up is in the south. The reason why, that's where the money is, that's where the drugs are, and that's where the ground is fresh.
Yep.
Right? So it's game time, fighting season, summer. And with the dog guy, you're essentially your walking point. You are numero uno. You know the guy that comes out the tunnel with the flag and have all the players? Yeah, you're there with. So everybody else is doing their job, scanning, looking for threats, doors, windows, checking if they're on the right course, making sure their radio calls. Nobody's job really is to look at the ground. Like, that's the dog guy.
That's the dog guy, yeah.
But here's the interesting part. Is not only is that your job, you're the dog guy. The dog guy is supposed to, the canine handler is supposed to read the canine. It's like driving a car. A lot of times, it will search stuff, but sometimes you have to go, I need you to go to the right and search. I need you to go to the left and search. I need you to go to the right and search. Check out the pile of rocks. Check out this car. Check out this door. And so if you're not driving it, your dog might miss it because it's an animal, right? Like in combat, the dogs don't know the difference, right? Between like training environment, I'm going to get my ball.
And you're in war.
If you mess this up,
people die.
Yeah, they don't know. They don't know. And we're glad because that's why they're willing to work. That's why they're happy.
Fear.
Yeah,
There's
that's why they're happy to go do that.
Yeah.
Right? We're over here
They're
thinking,
like, oh, if I find this combatant, I'm going to get a ball.
Yeah. So
it's wild.
So if you're not paying attention, and that's where if you're not micro analyzing, if you're not like, what's the tail doing? What's the wind doing? What's the air doing? Like, what does the dirt look like? Like, is that freshly stepped? Is that old? Did somebody just pee there? Like, what is? So not only you have that, but you're also number one up front. So you also have to pay attention for threats.
So it seems like it almost attuned you into a tracker just as much as the dog.
Yeah, you have to.
Because you're kind of making sure that the dog's not missing anything. Really,
straight.
It's really fascinating.
It's like going to the golf course and you're over here like trying to find the wind. You have to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right? Like if anybody's ever seen some type of tracking, like they pick up the dirt, they look at it, it goes away. Like you're doing that because the wind, if you don't put your dog compared to what the wind is doing, it's all for naught.
Yeah.
Right? That's why it's hunting. Right? Hunting, you don't want to be downwind because then the deer smell you. So in the same way, you want the dog to be like the deer and to be able to
Smell everything.
smell
Yeah.
everything. Because if they can't,
Yep.
it doesn't. You'll walk right over something.
Yeah.
And that might be the last thing you walk over. So that sparked it. And so by the grace of God, like those 2 trips, that first one really solidified my trust in the dog, because we went through that whole deployment during fighting season, and everywhere we went, we meticulously planned. We paid attention to the gnat's ass of like where we're going to walk, where we're not going to walk, what route we're going to take. Like, and then also the dog on top of it, we didn't step on anything. Nobody got hurt. We didn't run into any booby traps, which was like unheard of for anybody. Because I've got friends and they don't have their legs anymore or missing because not because of the dog, but it's just because during fighting season in the South,
They just got the
it's
wrong
nasty.
path.
I'll give you an example. Like I have a buddy and God rest his soul, his last name is Nicole, and I went through selection with him too. One of those things, fighting season in the South, at nighttime, walking night vision, he moved a branch that was in the pathway and the branch was booby trapped.
Oh,
Killed him and the 18-year-old kid. It was his first tour behind him, right? Bye. Killed by a branch. So wrap your head around that, right? Like
I can't.
But here's the crazy part is like it might have been an 8-year-old who rigged that up.
For sure.
So it's when you're talking
wild
about kids,
war over there.
Yeah, when you're talking about kids,
Yep.
that's a whole different thing. So that kind of segmented and solidified me doing the dogs. And the next deployment, we did dogs, but it's more winter.
Yep. A little quieter.
Yeah, and we went towards the mountains, which was a whole different. I mean, you're talking like movie.
By the way, talk about beauty. It looks like it's incredible.
Oh yeah, you look like it would be a climbing movie.
Just picturesque mountaintops.
Snowdrift, mountaintops. However, fighting in it, not so much fun at all, right?
Yeah.
I remember getting off a helicopter and falling into, it's nighttime. You're on
6
this
feet of
mountain
snow.
and you're in snow that goes to your chest. You don't see your dog. Like your dog jumps and goes, whoop, right?
Wow.
Like, and then it goes, whoop, pops out. You're like, there you are, right? And you just like, so that was interesting, but that's probably some of the coldest I've ever been.
Yep.
When you get into areas like that,
What's the equipment difference? You just, like
more
equipment.
It's actually harder.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And the reason why it's harder is because not only do you have to dress for the cold,
got to bundle up,
but you can't dress too warm because you have to move.
Yeah.
And moving and sweating could be a detriment to you.
Yeah.
Because eventually you stop.
Yeah.
And when you stop moving and you're all wet and drenched, you'll freeze.
Yep.
So that's tricky too. So that deployment was awesome.
Well, I want to segue for a second because, one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you is, as you know, and as a lot of listeners know, there's a huge issue with our combat veterans coming home and not being able to find a purpose, not being able to find their place in our society. And sadly, there's a massive issue with suicide in combat veterans. And it absolutely breaks my heart that we have not been able to do more for our veterans, for them to come home and not only just feel a sense of purpose, but feel that gratitude from their countrymen and feel that, welcome home mentality that, for instance, guys in World War II got.
Oh, yeah.
They came home and there was flag flying, there was
Parades.
patriotism. Now these soldiers come home and they've got these, assholes that are giving them crap for serving their country and keeping them safe.
Yeah.
So it's just such a different dynamic. And I've just been always so impressed with what you've built, your business, your entrepreneurial spirit. And so I wanted to kind of dig into, whether you started that planning process while you still were serving, whether you came home and kind of had a reset period, then built. I think that would really be helpful for especially guys that are in the service now, that are just out of the service. What was it like for you building your business, and when did that process happen?
No, that's all really good points of it, and I think none of it for sure happened while I was in the military, right? Because, and I think that leads to the conversation of, right, you got suicides, you got how society is different. imagine what I've just talked to. And by the time I got out, I was 25. So I'm 25 years old. Where they say like the male brain doesn't even develop until they're like 25.
Yeah.
So imagine you got these kids, they're growing up, their education and their brain development is done in the military or combat. Okay, so your brain is literally built different. So then when you come home, let's just say you have this experience, you have this training, maybe some of these accomplishments, and you come home, and then naturally what you do is you're sitting at an apex. Right, they call it the tip of the spear. You are when the Secretary of Defense, the president, they're sitting in these rooms, and you're the players that they call to go execute.
You're the chess pieces on the board.
You're the chess piece. And like, again, you're not going after Bobby who has a shovel.
No.
You're going after, like, if you get this guy, it might end the war. Like, those are the level dudes that you're going after. It'd be like in World War II, like, if you guys get Hitler.
Yeah, it's over.
It's over. Everybody goes home.
Yep.
It's just, this is done with these level of, like, terrorism around the world, okay? And there's plenty of stuff that if we didn't get certain targets, you would have Times Square wouldn't exist.
Yep.
Right? And just to segue to, because I think this ties into the importance of some veterans, especially in this type of community, that level of professionalism at that age, when you come home and there is no like peer equivalent, you're a little thrown off. And so an example of this would be, not me personally, but there was another team, and they had a house in the middle of BFE, like Afghanistan. Well, in BFE Afghanistan, some places, especially terrorists, still have computers, right? It's not just like...
It's not all ghosts.
Yeah, like some of it, right? They have stuff.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they couldn't make the impact they could. They go, and on this hard drive, on this computer, they find information that I believe, and don't, hopefully anyone is listening, the NSA or anyone, don't hold me up to this, but it's already known. They found that there was a station wagon rigged to blow a vehicle explosive in New York.
Wow.
Okay. And I think I talked to some people and they go, I remember seeing that on the news, but it was only on the news for like a half a day. It was a blip, like a ticker. They showed it because they didn't want to.
That was real-time data.
They didn't want to freak people out, naturally.
That was real-time data found in the war zone.
So they go to the war zone. We're doing these level hits. They contact the channel, SWAT, everyone else that needs to goes and finds, right? You're talking within sub 24 hours in Times Square, parked on the curb, unoccupied station wagon rigged to blow. How many people go through Times Square?
Hundreds of thousands.
How many people walk by this thing, taking pictures, selfies, looking at the boards, shopping, saying, yay, I'm in New York City, buying T-shirts, hot dogs.
Completely unaware.
And because there's some apex men out there on a mountaintop, freezing their balls off, going through the hardest training known to man, doing this mission that no one in Times Square knows, saved all of their lives, changed the impact of every person's generation that came after them, forward, to, left, right, and they come back, and people cannot fathom the impact that they made.
People don't even know that they did it.
They don't. So then when you come back, and you look to left and right, and you go, all right, well, this guy is my boss, right? And maybe he's the same age as me. The difference is, while I was off doing these high-level things, this one just started climbing corporate ladder.
Yeah.
And now he's going to tell me.
It's got to be super frustrating.
So it's frustrating because you go from apex almost back to the, not to the janitor, but you're like, no one knows.
You got to start all over on a corporate ladder.
You start all over.
And no one thinks about that or gives credit to that.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So it's like the government trusts you with top secret clearances. They trust you to put your life on the line. They give you billions of dollars of funding, everything you can. They get assets, assets, CIA, all these other three legit to make sure that you can do your job, right? So it's like you get everything at your disposal, and then you come back and you can't get hired to do something. That's what gets goofy.
What do you think the government could do to improve the offboarding experience of soldiers because like you said, you've got these apex predators. They know how to take a command. They know how to execute a mission. They're organized. They're on time. They have a better level of execution than 99.9% of people their age, but they weren't climbing that corporate ladder. They were keeping us safe.
Yeah.
So what do you think the U.S. government could put in place to maybe give them an on-ramp into various industries where I don't think they should start at the bottom?
Yeah.
If there was a way to maybe, instead of that same process where you take a guy and in 6 months he's ready to go to a war zone and kill people and take commands, maybe there could be a way where a 6-month, boot camp for corporate America or a 6-month, suddenly you're not starting and bang nails, you're managing a job site.
Yep. I don't know there's much that like big government can necessarily do. But what I will say is like I also don't think that's their job.
It's not.
Right? So it's like their job is to make sure national defense, their job is not making sure necessarily you have a job at. So that's kind of where it gets.
But let me jump in on that. Our applications to join the armed forces at a historic low. In general,
For sure.
Young people don't want to join the armed forces.
Yeah.
I think in part because there has become this stigma. If you're a young kid or a teenager and all you hear in the news is, post-traumatic stress disorder, soldiers committing suicide, soldiers this and that, there's not enough positives. Yeah. And that's why I love highlighting you, because you are a success story. You're a W out of the armed forces. If there was that in place, and it's like, oh, wow, go serve your country, go put your life at risk and keep us safe. And when you come home, you're going to go through this 3-month boot camp to regain your footing in the civilian world. And you're not going to be at the lowest rung of society. Yeah. You're going to be a manager. You're going to be a junior manager. You're going to have a level of importance when you get back. I bet that we would see applications to join the armed forces go through the roof.
Yeah, I agree. We
need to jumpstart people wanting to get back into the Army. We need to boost up that enlistment process.
I think, and this is just off the top of my head, that's where I think like private organizations or just capitalist economy, they could go, hey, if you do this, that opens the door to when you get out. But I think that also starts with people showing the capability of what that person can do and the success in the corporate world, because that's translate to productivity, profit, whatever for the company. During my time in getting out, there wasn't probably enough of that yet in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Now you'll kind of see it. Like if you'll see some places, and let's just say from our community, and you're like, oh, well, former special operations. There's been enough movies out that people are like, oh, that's a high level.
Yeah,
right?
I look like I want that guy around
That's
me.
a high level.
Yeah.
And so I think now that might be starting to come out.
Too.
But I also do think the war has taught us a lot, right? Just being the longest war in American history.
Yeah.
That I think the stigma isn't necessarily even the veteran coming out. I think it's the veteran is probably coming out, but then like what was accomplished by like foreign national policy are there. And so when you look at things of like go all the way back, you're like, okay, Vietnam, maybe a bust, right? Like did we win? Right? Like, okay,
definitely not.
Iraq, I
think we could call it a semi-success story.
Yeah, you can. Right? But then it's like it gets drug out because we're trying to set them up to do this thing, right? Called America, just put it there and it's not really working.
Yeah.
So it takes forever, right? And then try to do the same thing with Afghanistan, also being different, takes forever. And then we saw what happened like 2 years ago so I think what happens is that people attach to go, they scratch their head and they go, well, you're a part of that military industrial complex. And that maybe that wasn't that fruitful per se.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe a stigma comes from that.
What would you say the biggest hurdles you faced in building and growing your business were?
Ooh.
Because, guys, just so you know, Coastline K9, if you ever get the opportunity to go out there, you ever want to get a guard dog, he's got an incredible operation out in Naples, Florida. Brand new, everything with the dog kennels. It's a pretty high level setup you've got. Beautiful compound. You know, what did it take for you to get there?
Good. I mean, that's a good question. I still know, but okay. I think getting to that was humility. Like that's a big thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's from a character point of view and a personality trait. I think that's what trips up some veterans because in their head and on paper, awards, valor, like there is a track record of them being successful, selfless, right? All of these different things.
Yeah.
But then they get out and there's not necessarily there might not be a direct correlation of mentorship. And so that's where you start at the bottom because you don't have, okay, well, how do I take that and translate it? I mean, hunting terrorists doesn't really that's not necessarily going to be like, oh, well, you can manage this fund or this corporate.
Yeah.
So there's some of that. But what ends up happening is some guys go, all of my entire identity, ego, machismo, like accomplishments were in that. And that's behind me. And so what ends up happening is, I think from a mental point, they go, I've peaked.
At 25.
Yeah. You feel that you peak because, I mean, the entire military industrial complex, and then you look around and you're like, I'm up here, right? Like and just in perspective, right? From a statistical point of view, I think the numbers are, let's just say there's 1% of the entire American population that is even just in the general armed forces. Mm-hmm. I'm talking Navy, Army, big like Marines, Air Force, like the whole thing, only 1%. In special operations, it's 1% of the 1%. Mm-hmm. Like you're talking, I bet you, I mean, you're talking maybe like 200,000 guys, like
out of the whole country.
Yeah. So picture this, a full football stadium, let's say a college football stadium is like 85,000 college kids. Okay. Do 2 football stadiums.
Yep.
And those people are like, from a performance point of view, they are on the apex doing international high level mission, right? So it's like, it's a small batch. So then you go out and you go, well, how do I apply? How do I apply
to society?
Yeah. How do I apply that? So what happens is I think guys you got to get away from, okay, the act of removing terrorists, and you have to understand like what other skills come to that.
Yeah.
Because the time on the gun is so minimal.
Yeah.
Compared to planning, operations, right? Like leadership is huge. Like, you know how it takes, how do you get a whole bunch of alpha people in line on the same objective, like same mission, same mentality. And oh, by the way, they might die.
Yeah.
So like, how do you keep them motivated to be sharp as a razor's edge?
Yeah.
That's leadership, right? Yeah. So it's like all these other things we can bring. But what happens is guys go, that was a hard mountain and I made it to the peak. Out in the civilian world, even if I accomplish those things, I don't think they're as high of a peak as what that was.
Yeah.
So it's like the big mountain was behind you. And so now it's like, what do you guys have to look forward to?
Yeah.
And I think I've seen some podcasts where athletes are the same, like, okay, you retire.
Where do you go from there?
What do you do? And then you see it now and you're like, okay, commentating for ESPN? Right? You
Same.
think
I get what you're saying.
is that the same feel
Yeah, it is.
as being the starting guy, right? In the Super Bowl?
You're never going to get that adrenaline rush.
So what happens is adrenaline chasing.
Yep.
Okay, you're
and that's a losing battle.
Yeah, it's a losing battle. So then you go, okay, well, how do I chase that satisfaction, that feeling? And you can't.
No.
So what you have to do is you have to go, what other mountain can I climb?
And building a business is that. You get that same adrenaline.
That's a challenge.
Getting a W in a business
100%.
is the best feeling you can ever have.
The economy in the world is ruthless, right? So it becomes a different challenge. So I think instead of going, oh, I'll never make, you literally just have to go, what's the next mountain? And I think understanding that.
And if you set some small mountains, you're constantly.
For sure.
That's how you build the business. I want to kind of change gears a little so we can squeeze some of the dog stuff in. As everyone knows by now, you're a dog trainer. You've got Coastline K9. You work with every type of dog, but I'd say definitely your specialty, given your history and your background, is protection dogs.
Yes.
And, you know, as some of you know, I do have a protection dog myself. I think that we can all act tough with our guns and our training and range time. But look, as someone that was robbed at gunpoint in my own home, I had guns everywhere and I did not have time to grab one. If I had a guard dog there, I think I either wouldn't have gotten robbed or it would have been a very different situation. So I do think that if you live a life where you have nice things or you're even somewhat visible, you post your nice stuff on the internet, there's a huge argument for having a guard dog. And I will say that after doing the research, you can attest to this certainly, not all guard dogs are created equally. Yeah. I'd love to know, you know, what you would consider some red flags, or maybe you could give our listeners some advice in, you know, looking for or purchasing a guard dog.
No, that's good. Naturally, you know, what I believe that we do is at a high level is family safe, kids safe, family protection dogs that are assets. They're family members, but if you think about it, why do people get dogs, right? And I bet you everybody would go, well, one, I like them as family members, but I like when they let me know of stuff, right? Like they got ears, they got eyes, they got nose. People like that.
Yeah.
I think the dog that barks the most is probably Chihuahua, right? Okay, but people like that, right? Even
I want to know if someone's walking up to my house.
100%. So when you get to high-level family protection dogs, I think that there's a few misnomers, and then there's some red flags that people need to pay attention to, because believe it or not, I think maybe 10 years ago, like, people didn't really have high-level family protection dogs. Now you're seeing them in movies, commercials, right? John Wick, you see Halle Berry running around with, you see all this other stuff. But before, it wasn't like that. And I think people thought they were just reserved for like military or police.
Yeah.
First red flag is that people think that's how most of them are. And so people see YouTube, they see videos, and they think, one, that protection dogs by nature are like aggressive.
Yep.
Okay. And so that can't be further from the truth. Just to clarify, like when you are looking at family protection dogs, it's not just an aggressive dog, right? Like it's a dog that is trained, house, obedience, on leash, off leash, full control.
And they're loving. I can say
super loving.
They can be a
cuddling,
loving. You can have that loving
family
bond
member,
like any other dog.
Yeah.
They'll just, risk their life for you.
Correct. They do protection out of obedience.
Yep.
And if it becomes the worst situation, the worst day of your life, it's like pulling a fire alarm, right? In the sense of you command this dog, or the dog really sees clearly like this is a threat, and the dog then willing to trade its life and go intercept the threat so that you can get a gun, you can get your kids, you can get in your car, you can get in your house, you can lock the doors, you can 911, you can get help. So their job is really an intermediary asset.
Yep.
That is living, breathing, and is trained. Some red flags is like, don't get a police dog. Don't get a dog and just assume that the dog will do protection naturally. That's not that's further from the truth.
Yep.
Right? They have to be trained, and they have to be trained at a high level by a person or a company that's what they specialize in. Okay? There are certain breeds that you want to stay away from just because of trainability wise.
And what would you say those breeds are?
So I think people think of
The biggest one, I think, people all want a Doberman.
Yeah.
That is not a good guard dog.
Yeah. So if you just kind of touch on those, right? Like people think of Dobermans, Rottweilers, Pit Bulls, dogs like that.
Like tough-looking
Yeah,
dogs.
tough-looking dogs.
But they're not guard dogs.
They look at dogs of like these statures from like the 50s, and they're just like, these dogs look like a protection.
Yeah.
And so the problem is now in 2024 is that, maybe like 40 years ago, but for the same reason people like the look, same people wanted less of a dog and just like a pet with the same look, and they've done messed up
The
genetics, right? And so now you have tons of those traditional breeds. You got a lot of health problems, skin allergies, and then the dog doesn't have what is genetically required to have the courage, right, and the protection and trainability. Okay, trainability is a thing too.
Yep.
And so they have to be able to be trainable. And it's sometimes.
So what do you say? Just Dutch Shepherds and Belgian Malinois are the two primary dogs, or hybrids of the two?
Yeah, I would kind of say that now, because you would almost, and most trainers will agree, like you kind of throw German Shepherd into with the Doberman now,
German
because
Shepherd, true, for sure.
they've been
Great dog.
They've been bred out the wazoo for the look, and just because you have a German Shepherd doesn't mean it's going to do protection or protect you. It might just want to protect itself.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So what we find is what you'll see now a lot in special ops. You'll see a lot of police departments going to it. You'll see a lot of use cases, even super sports, right? You'll see a lot of sport dog trainers. You'll see the Malinois and the Dutch Shepherds, because it is almost like going back in time and having those dogs of like 30, 40 years ago, where you have the dog that you actually want. They haven't been really messed up yet.
Yeah.
It will happen, right? Give it 15, 20 years. It'll happen. But for now, it's generally, they're super highly trainable. Now, they're not for everyone. They're highly trainable, way less health risks, because people haven't genetically destroyed them.
I tell people it is a commitment. Dagger requires a lot of walks. These dogs need exercise. They need social stimulation. This is not a chihuahua or like a Shih Tzu you can leave in your house for 3 days at a time. It's a commitment. You have to treat it like this is a soldier that's living in your house that will love me, protect me, but you have to give back to it. So that's one thing I'll say. There was a story you told me, because, without divulging too much client confidentiality, there was a story that you told me that a woman bought a dog and it ended up saving her life shortly after she got it. Can you tell some of that story?
Yeah, of course. So this was a female client, she had, I think, a 5-year-old son. And so she was going around. She ended up getting a protection dog through us. We delivered the dog, okay? And so what we do with our clients is we spend multiple days with them. That's going back to a red flag. Like, what we do is we spend multiple days with the owner and going everything nuts to bolts, getting the dog integrated in the family, kids, with other pets, the lifestyle, the workplace, getting the dog bonded with them. And then we also teach them all the obedience, the commands, oath. And then we leave typically like a week later once they are fully ingrained and comfortable. We don't just drop off the dog, here's keys like a valet, and throw you like keys to your car and like figure it out. And I think that's something that we bring to the table, and it helps. And so in this case, our whole objective is if you decide to get a family protection dog, this dog should be applicable the day we leave.
Yep.
Right? So in this case, the client has a dog. 14 days after we left and did the delivery, the instructions, got it integrated in the whole home. Kid was playing out in the yard with the truck with his dog. All right. And an adult male comes walking down the street, sees an opportunity that the front gate of the yard is open, lets himself onto the property and starts talking and coercing with the kid. Okay? He doesn't see their family protection dog around the corner, but he goes to make a move to take the kid to abduct him and take him off the property and out the gate, right? Come with me, la la la, quick grab, snatch. Now we all know, okay, young kid gets kidnapped. That's rough. Like,
That's
I don't
the
know
worst case scenario
what
for
the
any parent.
percentage
I
of
can't
success
imagine.
comes from that, right? So the dog comes from around the corner, sees that this kid is getting picked up by this adult man, never introduced to the man, like it's completely foreign.
Yep.
But the dog has trained to see what like a kid abduction looks like. And so the dog, boom, I've seen this before, goes, engages the guy on their property, everything good, legal, trespassing.
Yep.
The cops come eventually, like 15 minutes later.
Yeah.
And so this is another thing. Cops come after the fact.
Yeah, of
and I
course.
think people don't realize that. Cops are not like waiting for something to happen to
No,
you
they
a
react.
few feet away.
They're reactive.
Right? And sometimes most of the times they're also busy.
Yeah.
So you fall on a scale of like, I'll get to you when I can.
Yep.
And so here's where it's beautiful to have family protection dog, is that the family protection dog is dealing in real time with the threat. So the dog engages, holds the guy there, cops come, right? They come, they're trying to figure out the story. The guy's like, oh, this dog chased me down the street, right? I don't know. Well, they're like, well, how'd you know what yard to bring it back to? They're like, he's like, oh yeah. Well, his story wasn't making sense. So naturally he's got bit by the dog.
Mm-hmm.
All right. They're bandaging him up. The dog is fine, friendly afterwards. They gave him some commands. He let go. He was social. He wasn't an a-hole. He wasn't a liability. So they go to the ambulance. They start patching him up because they're called to the scene, and they have a habit of, right, they need to take care of everyone. So they go and they start running his information. Story's not checking out. Get his fingerprints. Boom.
Sexual predator?
Pedophile.
Wow.
Popped him, identified him in the ambulance.
So
Boom.
that woman
Cuffed
bought
him.
the dog, and 14 days later, it saved her child's life.
Yeah. She should
It's
be a
incredible.
mom again.
It's incredible.
Right? And then she's like, that 100% validated
Of course.
the investment.
Yeah.
Right? And that just goes to show you, like, in a moment's time, anything can happen.
Yep.
And so nobody has a crystal ball. So she can't go like, you know what? I'm going to get a protection dog, and I'm going to see a return on investment in 14 days. Right? We hope nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
Right? But, and I bet you, and I don't have a crystal ball either, but I bet you if he saw the kid out front playing with the truck and he saw this dog,
He probably would have left it alone.
kept walking
Yep.
down the sidewalk.
Yeah.
But moment of opportunity, and didn't know the dog, but it was too late.
Yeah.
And that's also goes into a segment of, okay, well, are these dogs trained only command driven?
No, you
only?
cruise it, yeah.
Or are they taught
They
situations?
have real world situational
Right.
awareness.
And so that's how we teach them. And that's a common question we get
Yeah.
asked a lot too. So,
So I guess, in closing, to kind of wrap this up, someone with your experience in the military, your experience training dogs, I think one thing that our listeners would be really interested to hear, someone that deals with real world security on a day-to-day basis,
yeah.
what would you consider some tips for just the regular person, whether they have a guard dog
Yeah.
or not, that they can take to increase their awareness, increase their situational security in their home and in their lives? Some tips and maybe some advice that you could give people to maybe keep themselves a little bit more safe or be a little bit more aware of their surroundings.
No, that's good. Just coming from this background and at a level of identifying threats, non-threats, threats in training, playing roles in real world, I think something that people have to wrap their head around is that people are watching you. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to creep listeners out or anything like that, but there's more people analyzing you than you actually probably think. And they are looking for low-hanging fruit, targets of opportunity.
Yep.
What people are looking for is anything that can let you know that you're of value, pretty much. That could be what car you're leaving in, arriving in, what house you own, what you're wearing, what clothes, name brand, shoes, watches. And then once something catches their eye, it's kind of like a fish, they just pay attention to it a little longer. And then if they notice that you are a person that just is kind of like lives in this bubble, Okay, now I'm gonna pay attention to you even more. And so I think like the number one tool that people can have is their brain, situational awareness. So like even how I move or I teach clients to move is you don't move paranoid, you just move aware. Okay? You just move to go, all right, if I go here, do I generally have an idea if something happens, what would that look like? And you take 3 minutes and kind of wrap your head around risk mitigation. Okay. So just in an example, like my wife all the time, we go to a restaurant, I find a place far away from the door and I'm watching and have a view of entrances and exits. And that's just simple. And that's just how we eat. That doesn't mean I'm waiting for something, but okay, what happens if there's even something simple? Fire, right? Like, okay, as a man and as the protector, even outside this conversation, you should be the one thinking about that, right? So some other considerations, I think, like when I'm dealing in the world that I am, because it's not just family protection dogs, but it's protecting like your assets. And you have to think of your assets as like you yourself as a person, because you're a provider. And then also you have to think about your family members or those like close people. So you have to pay attention to like how you move, what you want people to see, because sometimes that's super advantageous for you.
For sure.
Right? Sometimes you're going to a certain event. You need to be presentable. First impressions matter, stuff like that. However, there's other times where it goes, is it that important? Right? Can I just like fly under the radar, gray man, nobody knows? Not every time is like it needs to be a billboard. Right? There should be a time and a place.
Yeah.
The other is simple things of like if you are and your lifestyle is to be loud, which is perfectly fine because we're walking billboards of like who we are, what we can do for people, how we can help them, then I think that's really where family protection dogs is like, you should really consider it because people, right? People, even well-known people, they have security people all time. Okay? They pay people, but that's also a problem is that they pay people. So one thing that people don't ask, or I guess don't really realize is you are paying for someone's loyalty. You are paying for someone not to leak your information, how you move, what your schedule is like, what type of coffee you like. And I'm not saying security guards, like they're not good. I'm just saying like with a family protection dog,
His salary is a bowl of food.
No, he's not on nobody's payroll.
No.
He's not leaking any secrets.
Yeah.
But imagine, let's say you're walking down, let's just say here, and you got a nice watch, or you're doing whatever. But attached to that watch is a well-trained dog that moves different, that's obedient. I'm going to go to the person that is not walking the dog.
For sure.
Right?
I've noticed that. People cross the other side of the
100%.
street when they see me with Dagger.
And that goes with families. It doesn't even have to be just because you have a watch or a nice car. It could be, well, if I'm walking or my wife is walking or someone's spouse is walking and their kid and they're going through life, okay, well, the mom who's got the little kid that also can't defend her and she's paying attention to, I need to get this kid fed, but she's occupied. Okay, what about the one that looks put together, situational aware, not in her phone 24/7? I'm not just saying her, but anyone. They have a kid, and then they have this fully trained dog. Which one are you paying attention to?
Yeah.
Okay, so transitional spaces are super big, dog or not dog, like to and from. Coming from, shopping, eating, to car, leaving car, going to home. Basically, those transition periods of you're doing something to your transportation, and from your transportation to your dwelling or doing something.
That's where they get you.
Those places is because what happens is you're not occupied by the shopping or the eating, and you're not occupied by the driving. You're just going to and from. And so most people try to fit in all the other stuff in between that, whether it's phone calls, meetings, whatever it is.
They're not paying attention.
Or just generally not paying attention.
Yeah.
And so I'm just waiting for you to come and go. I don't even have to move, right? It's like you're a bird or a fish going by me. And so that's where those transitional spaces are also where people can camp out. They can pay attention to you. And then also if they do something, yeah, there's people, but how many times have you seen something happen and people just pull out their phone, they watch, or they don't do anything, they don't help you. So they're not worried about people, but they're worrying about, can I hit you? Can I do something to you? And can they get out? Do they have an escape route? And so transitional spaces, like they can blend back into the populace.
Yeah.
Right. And that's other consideration just when you move, is that when people have no situational awareness, or they think that we live in a world that's rainbows and unicorns and butterflies, that's a little like, that's misplaced. But once something has happened to you, or once you've been in the middle of something, you forever see the
Start
world
moving way differently. I'll tell that first person.
Way differently. And so I think it's because everything gets put in perspective.
Yeah.
But if you can move prior to that and just move smarter or more aware, I think that's something that I don't think a lot of people, they do. No. Right? They just think they rely on other people, or they put their faith in people too much and they go, oh yeah, no, that would never happen to me. Exactly. That's like the most egotistical thing you could say. Like it could happen to me. Right. And
you've trained your whole life for it.
Like,
for sure.
Right. And I'm a nobody, right? In the sense of just like, I try to move a certain ways, but that's the thing, is that people are just looking for opportunity.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily, like, your name doesn't matter. It's just, what can they get from you? All right. And that might be something extremely petty, right? Like it literally,
you never know.
It just might be because somebody is upset and is going to take it out on you, and they don't care the consequences. Like, it doesn't have to be because you're a high net worth person or you have something of value. It could, the world is crazy. And I think
crazier
like,
than ever lately.
Once you get outside of like first world, you see how the rest of the world is. Like, the world is crazier than people think.
Yep.
Right?
It is. The world is a fucked up place.
So I think the biggest thing is like, you are your own first responsibility for your own like bubble of protection. You cannot rely on anyone else. Like,
people need to live more like we are the first line of defense.
That's it.
You know?
You can't hope someone helps you.
Exactly.
Right? And that includes, you think people are going to put their phone down and help you and get in the mix? No. Right? You think police are just waiting with open arms and waiting for no, they're driving 15 minutes away from someone else, right? Or maybe not. They're not coming because it's human error or whatever. Yeah. So you have to be in the mind of, you are in charge of your own safety, your friend's safety, your family's safety. That's not just locking the doors at home. Like, that's when you're out and about as well.
Yeah. Anyways, guys, you've been listening to the Art Life podcast. We've got Erick Innis, Coastline K9. Get yourself a guard dog. Be your first line of defense. Take care of yourselves out there. Erick, thank you so much for coming out here, being on the show. Thank you for your service.
Appreciate
I love
it.
you, brother.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Man. Whoa, this was awesome. Guys, check out Coastline K9. Anything you want to plug while you're here?
No, I think most of the action-packed stuff is, if you go to our Instagram at Coastline_K9, and there's a lot of stuff that you might go down the rabbit hole just watching all the cool videos and the training and stuff like that.
For sure. Thank you, brother.
Of course.
Have a great one.
Appreciate it.